Welcome back. This is going to be episode 3 of the Pixel Platformer. Mr. T here. In this video, we're just going to be adding a couple things to our code. And one of them you're going to need for sure, and the other one is optional. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to allow the sprite to flip. And right now with this red capsule, if this thing were to flip, it looks completely symmetrical. So we're not going to notice anything. So I'm going to add something really simple. Just a quick 2D object. We're going to add a circle here. And this circle, let's make it black. You choose any color you want. And this is just for prototyping. So I'm just going to move this up and we're going to modify this a little bit to look a little bit like a mask. And let's make that a little bit smaller. Let's go this way, that way, and move it up. So it looks like it's kind of facing to the right now is what we're going for. And we're going to see how that changes with code. So first, let's work on that. Next, so the first thing we're going to do is implement a flip to our script. And then after that, I'm going to show you how to make the jump a variable jump, because currently our jump is identical every single time. So let's go into our player movement script here. And we're just going to add one more variable at the top here. And it can be, let's put it right here. It's going to be private. We don't need to see it. And this is just going to be a bool that defines which way we're facing. So we're going to call it is facing right. Okay. And we're going to default that to true. And that's because the way I just brought in that little black mask, our player is facing right off the start of the game, and your sprite should be facing in this direction when we bring in our pixel art in the next couple videos. So let's implement this flip. Now what we're going to need to do is we're going to create a custom method that's going to be updated in the update function. It's going to be checked, and we're just going to call it flip. Okay, and it's auto-filling there to something else. So let's fix that. It's flip. And it's red underlined because it has no reference to what this is. So we're going to make a new method, private void, and we're going to call it flip. And let's put in a few lines of code to allow our player sprite to flip. So this is only going to, this has a pretty specific if statement that we're going to make in this. And this if statement is basically checking one of two things. It's going to check if you're facing right, but you're pressing the move left button, it needs to flip. And the opposite, if you're facing left and you're pressing the move right direction, the right arrow, it needs to flip again. So how are we going to do this? Well, in this if, it needs to check those two conditions. So the first one is going to be is facing right. Okay, if that's true, and we are moving to the left. And how are we going to do that? Well, we're just going to check that horizontal input, and moving left would be negative. So we're going to check, is it less than 0? Okay. Now that's going to make it flip one way, but how are we going to make it go the other direction? Well, we're going to put in an or. Okay, so the double vertical line there is saying either the left is going to be true or the right. Either one works. So we're going to do the same thing, but the opposite. So we're going to put in a exclamation mark in front. Now what's this going to do is when we use is facing, it's saying is not facing right. So that's how you would say that in the English language. So that symbol right there in front there is not facing right. So it can do the opposite for bools, which is much easier than creating two bools to do the same thing essentially. So is not facing right, and this time, and so in other words, we're facing left, but we're pressing in the right direction. So we're going to get that horizontal input again, and this time if it is greater than 0, we want the character to flip. All right, so we got two situations here. Both we need the sprite to flip. We need the artwork to flip on the scale. So that's what we're going to be modifying here in Unity. So in Unity, the transform has three things. We have the position, we have the rotation, and we have the scale. And as we adjust the scale here, if we notice on our player, I take this scale, and if I put a negative in front, watch what happens. If I go negative, we can see now it's facing the other direction. And that's all we need to be changing, is from 1 to -1 and vice versa. So here's how we're going to do it. Simple. First, we're going to change is facing right to whatever it is not. So it's going to switch its current bool from true to false or false to true. So that's going to happen right off the bat. Next, and that will allow this code not to flip forever. So that's going to stop that from happening. Next, we're going to take the vector 3, in this case, the vector 3 of the local scale. So we're going to define this vector 3 as local scale, and we're going to get that from the transform of the player that this code is attached to, local scale. Okay, so that's going to get whatever the scale is currently, the x, y, z values for those scales. And we're going to reset this new local scale that we just, whoops, got to be careful with the autofill here, local scale dot x. And what we're going to do is multiply it by -1. Now, there's a shorter way in code to do this, but I'll do it in the longer way so we can see exactly what's going on. So I'm going to take this local scale, whatever it is currently, dot x, and we're going to be multiplying it by -1. Okay, so if it's negative, a negative times a negative will give you positive, and if it's positive, it'll switch it to negative. So multiplying by -1 is great for flipping scales. And the shorter way to write this, if we wanted to, just to show it, is local scale multiply equals by -1f. So that's the same way it'll take its current value and multiply it by -1. So that's a shorter way of doing the exact same thing. But for coding, we're going to leave it as is. And now we're going to apply that change. Okay, so then the transform, we're going to be setting its local scale to this new local scale, vector 3, which will be the negative version on the x. And now the flip should work. So let's save our script, Control S, and let's go back and let's see if when I'm moving from left to right and right to left, if our little mask flips. And it should work just fine here. But always test to make sure everything is implementing the way you want before we go on to the variable jump here. So we're going to test this out. And no matter what, you want to add this flip functionality for your graphics once you bring them into your game. So for prototyping purposes, let's see how this works. And you can see when I switch directions, the mask is switching. And if I switch directions in the air, so does the mask. Everything's working great. So what about a variable jump? So let's go back into our code. And remember, a variable jump is basically a way to not jump the full height. So if I just tap the jump button on a controller on my keyboard here, I want to jump a little bit less, and it gives more functionality, more mechanics to your video game. So you might want to add this. So how do we do it? Well, we're just going to add one more variable, and we're just going to be bringing in one more if statement. So it's going to be really easy to implement. So first thing here, we're going to have a public float, and we're going to call this our variable jump force. Okay, and this jump force is in the downward direction. Sorry, not downward, but we're going to be changing the y, and we're going to be cutting it in half. So we're going to set this to 0.5, and you again in the inspector can adjust this if you want this to activate more aggressively. If you did want it to, you would change this to 0.1, 0.2, because we're going to be multiplying it, which essentially is going to take the variable height and cut it in half. But we want this to only happen when we are releasing the jump button. So we're going to take this chunk of code here, and to be smart, we're going to save time, and we're going to copy it. Now, the only thing we need to change here, we got a couple things. We got to change on button, get button up is what we want. And is grounded is not something we need to check. We are obviously going to be in the air, so this wouldn't work if we put in a ground check. But what we do want to check is making sure that we are still on the way up, meaning we're going to check the velocity, okay, of the rigid body in the y direction, and we want to verify just to make sure that it is positive. So we need to make sure it's greater than 0. Okay, so if those two things are true, we're going to be changing this velocity. Now again, I was able to copy paste this, and I just need to adjust. We don't want jumping power here anymore. We're going to, again, whatever the current velocity in the y direction, and we're going to multiply that by the variable we just created, this variable jump force. So we're going to bring that down in here and multiply it there. So if it's 0.5, it's going to take the current y velocity, let's say it's 10, and it's going to cut it in half to 5. So gravity is going to push harder, push down faster with more force, not faster, but with more force based on this velocity. So it's going to be decrease the height of your jump is what's going to happen. So let's try this out. That's all we need to bring in a variable jump. So let's go back into Unity here, let the scripts update and test this out. And if everything's working without adjustments, we'll be able to move on to the next episode. All right, so let's move on down here. So we can see I have the variable jump force set to 0.5. Okay, so let's test this out and just see how it looks. So I'm going to do a full jump. I'm going to hold down my jump button. And it should look the same as what we already had before. And then I'm going to tap it and see if we get a shorter jump. So here's the full jump going all the way up to these other platforms. And then if I just tap it, you can see we're just getting an itty bitty jump now. And this is a great little mechanic, especially if you have hazards like spikes on the ceiling or something and you're not supposed to hit that and you just have to do a little jump or a very controlled jump. This will allow us to do it this way. Again, we cannot double jump, okay? We are, everything is really responsive and we're flipping on our sprite. This is a great starting prototype. Again, if you don't want the variable jump, you can get rid of it. You don't have to include that in your code. But I'm really happy with how this is prototyping right now. And let's move on to the next video. See you next time.